In the life of a company, there are many changes. There could be changes in go-to-market strategy, there could be changes in leadership. Behind each of these changes, there are repercussions on things like organization structure, people, systems, and processes that a lot of people don't really talk about. It is left to the execution part of things. HR has a very big role to play in the execution part of any strategic decision. But do they often get a seat at the table, and do they get to make the contribution that they're actually trained to make? Let's close the loop on this. Joining me on Close the Loop is Sbhobana Kailash. Sbhobana is the Group CHRO of Hubilo, a leading event tech company. And prior to Hubilo, she was in senior HR positions with companies like Freshworks and Amazon. Sbhobana, welcome to Close the Loop.
Thank you, Srini. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, right off the bat, what are some of the changes that you've seen, strategic changes that a company goes through in their lifetime?
Let me sort of contextualize this to a SaaS organization. I think a company goes through a number of changes. If I have to talk just about the strategic ones, leadership changes, like you rightly called out. And as the company matures and gets more funding, I think it tries to scale organizations. Mm-hmm. And scaling can be in terms of headcount, it can be in terms of just revenue, it can be in terms of diversifying the product portfolio, going from single product or multi-product or platform play. So these are some of the strategic changes that a company goes through.
Now, in these changes, like all of these changes are like, these are the things that actually make the headlines, right? But behind each of them, I'm sure that there is an impact that is felt on, because you can't just make such a big change and expect that the rest of the organization will automatically fit into it. So what are some of the impacts that you see that happens in the back end, if we can call it that?
Right. So the primary impact is on people from an HR standpoint. So when organizations change, when they go through these transitions, I think there is most likely an impact of how the organization gets organized. What does the structure look like? Let me take an example without being very broad-based in my answers. Let's take an example of transitioning from a sales-led to a product-led, PLG motion, right? Both of these are two distinct GTM motions, go-to-market motions to drive your revenue growth. And they have their own processes. I look at sales-led as more as a linear. Mm-hmm. Your marketing brings in your sales qualified leads, which then gets handed over to sales. They nurture it, they warm up the leads, they sell, they convert the leads.
And each of that is a team.
Each of that is a team. Yeah. Right? So one team has to finish their process for the next team to sort of begin. Yeah. And it is quite linear in that sense. And then your CX teams come in, which takes care of retentions and renewals and the farming. So whereas in product-led, I think all of this can happen in parallel. And your product is your hero. Yeah. Your customers embark on a journey where they're discovering products for themselves. Mm-hmm. They are identifying what is our problem statement and how does each of these products solve, right? So your product has to be robust. Yeah. It has to be really competitive. The pricing has to be super clear. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of automation involved in PLG.
But quite often what I've seen is, and I've been in companies that have gone through these changes, is that HR is often, the last person in the chain, in a way, right? So it's always the leadership and the business who take these decisions. But I don't get the feeling that they honestly think through the entire impact. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I've been in the industry for over 2 decades now, and I don't get the feeling that HR is involved in the initial discussions. I think it's a credibility that unfortunately HR has established in the company. We have been more of a service-oriented function as opposed to taking the forefront, leading the change, and sort of informing decision-making. Right, but times are changing. There are many organizations and many organizations, the CEOs have come from HR. Right? Unilever is a great example. Right? So I think times are changing, and HR is also upskilling. Business acumen and their understanding, the depth of understanding of the business is also improving.
And is it really because I mean HR also, if you look at the top flight HR executives like yourself, and you all have a great experience, you're highly qualified, some of them go to the best institutes that train HR people like XLRI and all that. So there's the acumen, I think, is there, but is it really a question of getting a platform internally to say that, look, I want to hear your voice.
Yes.
Is it a given? It's not just about whether the person has the acumen, but will the CEO turn to you, to HR and say that, okay, I want to take this decision, but I want to hear your input on this.
In my case, yes, but I'm not sure if I hear people, and when I mentor people, when I go to these networking events, I do hear a lot of whining more than saying I'm able to lead from the front. I have a seat at the table. Correct. Seat at the table is not just bringing in HR to give the analytics and the overall headlines of how HR is doing. It's also about involving them in the decision making. And we cannot generalize and say, in every company it is like this, CEOs don't involve.
Right. So what would be the best way? Like, let's say that no one is going to magically flip the coin and say that, okay, I'm going to start involving HR. What should HR leaders and managers do? Like in a situation like you mentioned, let's say your company has taken a decision to go from a sales to a product-led motion, and you hear about it as a HR leader. What are some of the proactive steps that HR can take to make sure that there's some original thought that's coming in that others have not thought?
I think there are a few dimensions that HR has to think through. One is the organization is changing. The skill sets are going to change because of course you need to organize differently. Product is your hero, so you have to think about bringing in more design thinkers on board. Jobs are not going to be jobs anymore. It's going to be roles. People are going to play multiple roles that goes beyond their defined job description. It could be community-based role. It could be ad hoc roles. It could be project-based roles. That they could do one time and then move over to. And as time goes by, these roles also evolve. Right? So we should expect that roles will migrate from one function to another. Right? A social media marketing could sit in marketing now. It could move under product. Product could organize as pods, just like how engineering organizes. So these are changes that one should expect, and HR should learn and adapt themselves to manage these kind of roles and the expectations that come from people that are playing these roles.
Right.
We have to think about reward differently. We have to think about how do we hire. Right? Like I said, not just looking at formal education. We have to look at what people bring to table.
For an HR executive or leader to have that perspective, what kind of training that do they need to give themselves to be able to even have this conversation?
Yeah, so it goes beyond HR training. I think they have to be very deeply ingrained with the business. They have to sit in and listen to every conversation and not just shut themselves off saying, this is a marketing conversation, this is a pricing conversation, it doesn't concern me. They have to be really in the thick of things, understand what's going on, and I think ask the right questions, be humble, ask the right questions, be on a constant, just flip the switch and be on a constant mode of learning. That is very critical. And putting your learning to practice is also important.
Yeah, I think most M&As fail at the integration stage. I think on paper, I think they work out the synergies really well, but it's only when they start integrating teams and org structures. So any blind spots that exist which you want to call out when integrating companies?
Yeah, I think there are many blind spots. Like you rightly pointed out, we can do a clear 30, 60, 90-day plan on paper, have a solid team, integration team, and roles assigned for each and everybody. But there are, 9 out of 10 times integrations fail because of people and egos and cultures clashing, not because the deal was not structured right. All the deal structuring was also very key, and I'll talk about it in a moment. Right? So blind spot one, let me start with the easier one, which is the deal structuring. Typically, deals are structured when you're acquiring, say, a small company and acquiring another small company. So deal is structured in a way where the founders will stay with the company to sort of help the company succeed for some time at least. We need them. We don't want to lose the IP. We don't want to lose the knowledge and the networks that come. So we tend to keep the founders on board for some time, and then we sort of slowly retire them, transition them, right? So structuring the compensation in a way that there is milestone payments and not everything goes upfront is important. So, and one cannot sort of rest thinking that, okay, we've set up milestone payments, which is based on tenure and them achieving certain targets, and relax, right? The targets have to be realistic. Otherwise, if they realize that they're not going to earn anything out of the deal, they might as well take off. There is a flight risk there as well.
Finally, if let's say you were to address the audience, largely our HR, what would be a few words of advice that you would give them to start playing a bigger role in the organizational change aspect, which follows a strategic decision?
I think there's no shortcut to hard work. Earning a seat at the table is easy, but sustaining that and building that credibility is hard. So invest in yourself, be humble, continuously learn. Learn the business. There is absolutely no shortcut. You have to be present in every meetings and present and listen, not to respond or react, but listen to come up with solutions that solves business problem. I think you will have to be really the partner for your CEO and think a few steps ahead and think not just in terms of, will the business strategy work and what does it mean for HR, but also think about what can this change cost in terms of ramifications a few months, few years down the line. And how do you then think about your entire workforce, not just upskilling yourself, but how do you sort of upskill or up the learning quotient of the entire organization? You need to put the company on a path of profitability. And that's not just the CEO's job. You also have a huge part to play. And one has to be really assertive when it comes to managing hiring. Don't be an order taker. Don't get carried away. Right? You may have money today, but look at the runway. Look at whether you need that person on board. And I think one can get very creative in today's world with all these employer of record providers, solution providers like Remote and Deal and Papaya. I think you can hire anywhere. The world is pretty much your playground. So times are hard. There's layoffs everywhere and restructuring, and there is this sense of insecurity. And I think we have a huge part to play in
assuaging
concerns. Yes, keeping people. That is
assuring
a key role.
people.
Assuring people.
Thanks so much. I think those are great points, and I'm sure that our audience will really value your inputs. Thanks, Shubhana, for joining.
Thank you, Srini. Wonderful being here today and meeting your crew as well.